Hi, my name is Abby Suckle. I'm an architect, and I want to tell you a bit about the Seagram Building. Since it sold liquor, the Seagram Corporation had a rather dubious reputation during Prohibition, so Samuel Bronfman decided to do something to redeem it. He thought that what he needed was a corporate headquarters in New York and acquired the site at 375 Park Avenue for $4 million. He hired Charles Luckman, who's now in Los Angeles, to design his headquarters. In due course, Luckman produced a design which Architectural Forum likened to a, quote, enormous cigarette lighter. The rendering was published in the New York Herald Tribune, which his daughter Phyllis, who was living in Paris and working as a sculptor, saw. Well, she got incensed and hurriedly sent an 8-page letter home, starting with, no, 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 explaining why it was a terrible design. Her father tried to mollify her by suggesting that she choose the marble for the lobby, but that didn't go over very well. He ended up appointing her as the director of planning, so she came back to lead the job. Her next problem, of course, was who to commission. She went to MoMA and met with Philip Johnson, who was then the head of the architecture department, with the goal of getting a building which, quote, expresses the best of society in which you live, and at the same time your hopes for the betterment of this society. The three architects at the top of the list were Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, which, oddly enough, was actually a name he made up because he thought it would make him sound better when he was in Germany. Mies was the last director of the Bauhaus in Dessau, and when the Nazis forced the school to close, he ended up deciding to emigrate to the U.S., and he eventually became dean of the Illinois Institute of Technology. In the profession, he was extremely well thought of, but he had a few slight drawbacks, which is, first, that he had yet to build a tall office building anywhere, and second, he wasn't actually licensed as an architect in New York, which took a couple of years to actually happen. So Johnson stepped up to the plate and decided to collaborate with him. He, too, had yet to build a tall building, so we needed another architecture firm, and Eli Jacques Kahn of Kahn and Jacobs was hired to be the associate architect. Kahn had helpfully entered his name into the early discussions by sending a letter and a brochure to Bronfman in July 1951 and following it up with a few hypothetical sketches. He also did try to, quote, improve on the design during the process, which was nixed by Phyllis Lambert and eventually became a good partner. So what did they produce? Well, there were many firsts. The 38-story building was set back from Park Avenue on a much-admired plaza, which caused the city to actually change the zoning code in 1961 in order to facilitate including plazas by adding an additional 10 square feet of interior space for every square foot of street-level open space. On a technical level, it was the first structural frame to use high-strength bolted connections. There were 1,500 tons of bronze on the building, and it was the most expensive skyscraper at its time, costing about double what other office buildings in New York did. There's also the bronze vertical column covers that express structure. Window shades, for instance, were only allowed to open in 3 positions, and the glass was bronze. The Four Seasons restaurant came about when Bronfman hired Joseph Baum Restaurant Associates to make a restaurant to add value to the building. James Beard and Mimi Sheridan were on the research and testing team for the menu, and they decided to highlight American cuisine. Credited with the first seasonally changing menus, and was also the first restaurant in the U.S. to cook using fresh wild mushrooms. It cost $4.5 million to open. Just to put it in perspective, the Guggenheim Museum actually cost $3 million. The restaurant became famous for its power lunches from the Esquire 1979 article, which also included a seating chart of the grill room. JFK's 45th birthday dinner was actually held there. But the quality of the food, of course, has declined somewhat over time. On October 15th, 2000, RFR Holdings, which again was A.B. Rosen and Michael Fuchs, purchased the building for about $380 million, or $540 a square foot. And of course, renovations were in order. The first for the restaurant as well as the building. The first lawsuit was about the middle-of-the-night removal of Le Tricône, the curtain Picasso had designed for the Ballet Russe, which it had been displayed at the restaurant since 1959. Rosen decided that what he called the schmata was beyond repair and declared that structural issues in the hallway required immediate attention, forcing him to remove the famous painting. However, New York Landmark Conservancy at this point was the actual owner, and they filed a lawsuit in New York State Supreme Court on February 6, 2014, which did not stop Rosen from hiring a moving company to take down the curtain 3 days later at 3 a.m. on Sunday, February 9, 2014. After some fuss, the curtain was donated to the New York Historical, which is where it is at the moment. The restaurant closed in 2016. There seems to have been an accusation of sexual molestation by Nicolini, who was one of the maitre d's, which kind of speeded up the process. And it was reopened by the major food group as the Pool and the Grill. Pete Wells, the New York Times restaurant critic, panned both, and the food and the decor. It's currently still open. There was also another restaurant in the Seagram Building called the Brasserie in the basement, which was famous for being open 24 hours a day and serving French food, especially the onion soup. It was, of course, somewhat dated because the East Side had gone from being, it's hard to imagine now, where the most interesting, where all the artists and interesting young people live, to what it became, which is rather more less trendy. So Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro were offered their first large-scale commission in 1999. They introduced many of the ideas that they would go on to develop in their later work, including video screens to film guests entering, tabletops made of resin, translucent glass treads on the stairs, and a sense of lightness. The menu changed. They didn't serve the onion soup, but this, again, it closed about 15 years later, and at the moment has been closed. The building currently has been renovated, and there is wellness centers and other amenities on the lower levels for the tenants.